The Ardennes forest in Belgium is a serene landscape of thick trees and rolling hills, its winding roads shaded by dense canopies and dappled with sunlight. But beneath this peaceful surface, the land carries dark memories of one of World War II's most brutal confrontations, the Battle of the Bulge. Here, in the bitter winter of 1944-45, Allied and German forces clashed in an unexpected assault that would claim tens of thousands of lives in brutal conditions. The forest absorbed the fury of artillery, the cries of wounded soldiers, and the despair of those who fought in near-hopeless conditions. Today, the Ardennes appears peaceful. Yet those who walk through these woods and villages at night report eerie sightings and unexplained phenomena that suggest the battle has never truly ended. Shadowy figures emerge from the fog, the echoes of distant gunfire pierce the silence, and chilling apparitions leave witnesses forever changed. 4 stories have emerged from the locals and soldiers who experienced the unexplainable on these haunted grounds, each one a piece of the enduring legacy of the Battle of the Bulge. Story 1. The Phantom Soldiers of Bastogne. In the years following the Battle of the Bulge, Bastogne, a small town in southern Belgium, rebuilt itself from the ruins of war. The people of Bastogne are used to the grim tales of what happened there, how the town was surrounded by German forces, and how the American soldiers, severely outnumbered, held the line through unrelenting attacks and deadly winter conditions. The bravery and the desperation of those days became part of the town's collective memory, but for some, those memories remain chillingly real. One such witness was Henriette Lambert, a local who had grown up listening to the stories of the siege. As a young girl, Henriette often wandered the forests near her home, but as she grew older, she became cautious of entering the woods alone, especially at night. After a chilling experience she had one winter night, she would never return alone again. Henriette was in her early 20s when she decided to walk home through the Ardennes one late afternoon. The air was sharp and cold, the forest quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves beneath her boots. She had walked this path many times before, but tonight felt different. An eerie stillness seemed to blanket the trees, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. As dusk fell, a thick fog settled over the forest, obscuring the path ahead. Henriette quickened her pace, feeling an unshakable sense of unease creeping over her. The fog seemed to thicken with every step, swirling around her until she could barely see her hand in front of her face. And then she heard it, a low murmur, like the distant hum of voices. She stopped, straining to listen, her heart pounding. The voices grew louder, joined by the faint sound of footsteps crunching through the snow. She turned, expecting to see another traveler on the path, but there was no one there. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the fog. Henriette's pulse quickened as she realized the voices were speaking in English, a language she recognized but did not fully understand. The voices sounded hurried, urgent, and filled with a strange, haunting despair. She called out, hoping it was simply a group of hikers or tourists, but the voices did not respond. Instead, they grew louder, as though the unseen soldiers were drawing closer. And then, out of the fog, she saw them, figures in tattered, frost-covered uniforms, their faces gaunt and pale, their eyes hollow. Henriette's heart leapt to her throat as she took in the sight. The soldiers moved in formation, their heads down, as if trapped in a grim march that they could never escape. She could see their breath misting in the cold air, hear the soft murmur of their voices as they muttered to one another in low, haunting tones. She took a step back, her mind racing, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. The soldiers looked at her, but seemed to see right through her, their expressions vacant, as though they were ghosts trapped in a memory of the battle. One soldier paused, his hollow eyes meeting hers for a brief, chilling moment before he turned away, disappearing into the fog. Henriette ran, her footsteps echoing through the silent woods as she fled from the ghostly soldiers. When she finally reached her home, she was breathless, her skin icy with fear. She never spoke of what she had seen that night, but she would forever avoid the Ardennes after dark, haunted by the memory of the phantom soldiers who wandered the forest, lost to time. Story 2. The Vanishing Tank of Foy. Foy, a small village near Bastogne, was another site of intense fighting during the Battle of the Bulge. Over the years, many visitors to Foy have reported strange phenomena, but one of the most chilling accounts comes from an American veteran, Frank Miller, who returned to Belgium decades after the war. Frank had fought in the Ardennes as a young man and had survived, but the memories of that brutal winter never left him. When he returned, hoping to find closure, he encountered something that would make him question the very nature of life and death. Frank had come back to Foy to honor the memories of his fallen comrades. He visited the memorials, walked the fields where he had once fought, and spent time reflecting on the brutal days of combat. But one night, as he walked through the village under the cover of darkness, he found himself drawn to a narrow, desolate road that led out of town. The air was cold, and a light snow had begun to fall, covering the road in a thin layer of white. As he walked, he heard the low rumble of engines, the distant clanking of treads, sounds that he knew all too well from his time in the war. Frank stopped, listening, his heart pounding as the sound grew louder. And then, out of the darkness, he saw it, a Sherman tank, its form faint and flickering, like an image trapped between worlds. The tank moved slowly, its turret swiveling, as if searching for an enemy that could no longer be seen. He watched in shock as the tank continued down the road, its metal hull covered in frost, the figures of ghostly soldiers visible through the hatch. They looked exhausted, their faces hollow with despair, their eyes fixed on some distant, invisible threat. One of the figures looked up, his gaze meeting Frank's with a look of unspoken recognition. Frank felt a chill run down his spine as he realized he was looking at the face of a friend, one of his comrades who had fallen during the battle. The tank continued down the road, disappearing into the snow-covered trees, its rumbling engine fading into the distance. Frank stood there, rooted to the spot, his mind reeling as he tried to make sense of what he had just witnessed. He had come to the Ardennes seeking closure, but instead, he had found a reminder of the war that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Story 3. The Ghostly Medic of Malmedy. The massacre at Malmedy was one of the darkest events of the Battle of the Bulge. Over 80 American POWs were brutally executed by German soldiers, a senseless act of violence that left a stain on the land. In the years following the war, locals and visitors alike have reported sightings of a spectral figure, a medic who appears to tend to the wounded, his spirit seemingly bound to the site of the massacre. Martha, a local nurse, had heard the stories of the medic's ghost, but had never believed them. One cold December night, however, as she drove past the site of the massacre, her car stalled. Frustrated, she stepped out to inspect the vehicle, shivering as the cold wind cut through her coat. As she stood there, she heard a faint voice, a low, urgent whisper, as though someone were calling for help. She turned, her heart pounding, but saw nothing in the darkness. Yet the voice grew louder, more desperate, and she felt an overwhelming urge to follow it. The path led her to a clearing, the very place where the massacre had taken place. In the faint moonlight, she saw him, a man in a tattered medic's uniform, kneeling beside an unseen patient, his hands moving with the practiced ease of someone tending to the wounded. The medic's face was pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to stretch across time. He looked up, meeting Martha's gaze, and for a moment, she felt as though she were staring into the eyes of a man who had seen the depths of human suffering. He reached out a hand, as if asking for her help, but before she could move, he vanished, leaving only the echo of his whispered plea in the cold night air. Shaken, Martha returned to her car, the experience haunting her for years to come. Story 4. The Eternal Sentries of St. Vith. St. Vith, a village that was nearly destroyed during the battle, is said to be watched over by spectral sentries, ghostly figures who patrol the village as if still defending it from an invisible threat. Locals and visitors alike report seeing these apparitions, their silent forms blending into the shadows, their faces hidden beneath the helmets of a war long past. One winter night, a young Belgian man named Luc was walking home through the village when he felt a strange sense of being watched. The streets were empty, the air thick with the weight of silence. He glanced over his shoulder, his heart racing, but saw nothing. Then, as he passed a ruined building, he saw them. two soldiers standing in the shadows, their forms faint and translucent, their faces hidden beneath the brims of their helmets. They stood at attention, their eyes scanning the village as though keeping watch over the ruins. Luke froze, his breath hitching as he took in the sight. The soldiers did not move, their forms as still as statues, but he could feel their presence, a heavy, haunting energy that filled the air. They seemed to look through him, their expressions grim, their bodies tense as if preparing for an enemy attack. The figures faded into the darkness, leaving Luck standing alone in the empty street. He would later tell his friends of the ghostly sentries, warning them that St. Vith was still guarded by the spirits of those who had fallen, their watch unbroken, even in death. The Battle of the Bulge left scars on the land and on the people who fought there, scars that have never fully healed. The Ardennes forest, once a place of beauty and tranquility, became a theater of war, a place where courage, fear, and death were woven into the very fabric of the earth. The spirits of the soldiers who fought there remain, their memories etched into the fog-covered hills and snow-laden trees. Those who dare to walk the fields of the Ardennes after dark may hear the echo of footsteps, the distant rumble of tanks, or the haunting cries of men who never left the battlefield. And for those who listen closely, the ghosts of the Battle of the Bulge still whisper their stories, a reminder that some battles never truly end.